Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here at the Center for Jewish History. My name is David Brown. I'm Director of Public History for the Leo Baeck Institute, and Leo Baeck Institute is very pleased to host this evening's concert with Elysium Between Two Continents, and I want to just first off thank Michael Lahr and Gregory von Leitis for their work as Elysium Between Two Continents, putting this concert together. We're thrilled to host it, but all the credit goes to them for connecting tonight's performer, Gottlieb Wallisch, and the Leo Baeck Institute, and the wonderful repertoire that we're going to hear tonight. I see a lot of familiar faces and a couple new ones, so I'll say just a couple sentences about the Leo Baeck Institute. We are a library and archive focused on German Jewish history, German-speaking Jewish history, so that, of course, includes Austria and many parts of Central Europe that were once part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And, of course, it includes figures like Arnold Schönberg, who has actually left many, many traces in our archives. We actually, last year, had a wonderful concert with another performer from Austria, Wolfgang Holzmeier, who sang the songs of Max Kowalski, who was Arnold Schönberg's attorney and a composer in his own right, and his papers at Leo Baeck are at Leo Baeck Institute. There's lots of interesting Schönberg correspondence in there. Just as a little example of the kinds of things that are in the collections of Leo Baeck Institute. We were founded in 1955, so we're celebrating our 70th anniversary this year, and we do lots of interesting programs in addition to maintaining our archives. So I hope that you'll go to lbi.org and also cjh.org to see what Leo Baeck Institute and the Center for Jewish History are doing. Just to put a couple things on your radar, on April 21st, Wilhelm Grosz, the director of the German Historical Museum, will be giving a lecture about the Diary of Anne Frank, of course in conjunction with the exhibit upstairs, and he is also the editor of a new critical scholarly edition of the diary, so I think that will be very interesting. And then we'll also have a panel discussion on the history of the Leo Baeck Institute on April 23rd. That will be our Leo Baeck Memorial Lecture. But you'll find all that and more at lbi.org. I just want to take care of one more formality, which is to remind everyone to take any noisemakers that you have and just put them on silent or even turn them off and just enjoy an hour or so of music. Again, thank you for coming. Thank you to Gottlieb Wallisch. We're very excited to hear this music, and I'll turn it over now to Michael Lahr to say a little bit more about tonight's program.
Thank you very much, David Brown. Thank you to the Leo Baeck Institute. We have had a long running collaboration that goes back 20 plus years, and I'm very happy that again we are joining forces here in New York, and we will do so also in Berlin on May 8 with a different program. I'm the artistic director of Elysium Between Two Continents, which was founded in 1983 by Gregory von Leitis as a theater company not far from here in the East Village. And out of it came 10 years later in 1993 this transatlantic cultural exchange organization, Elysium Between Two Continents. And our mission is really to build bridges by means of art and education across the Atlantic, bridges of friendship, of exchange, of dialogue. And one of the focuses of our work thematically has been to unearth and present art, works of literature and music that was created by artists who were persecuted by the Nazi regime. Many of them found exile on these shores in the United States, but many others were suppressed and persecuted and put into camps, and still were able to sometimes compose and write, and their art has been saved, even though most of them perished in the Holocaust. And this has been our mission for the last 30 plus years. One such program that we did in cooperation with the Leo Baeck Institute was 2 years ago, 2023, Innovators in Exile, presenting compositions by exiled Austrian and German composers who were part of the founders of the International Society for New Music in Salzburg in 1922. And among those artists were Egon Wellesz, who was actually instrumental in founding the EGNM, or ISNM as it is called here, and also Wilhelm Grosz. Arnold Schönberg was not part of this group. After our 3-day festival with Innovators in Exile here in New York, we presented a compilation of this program in 3 cities in Germany in 2024 and toured from Berlin to Munich and Frankfurt. And Gottlieb Wallisch in Germany was part of the performing artists and played a selection of Wilhelm Grosz's Improvisationen, Opus 45, composed in 1938-39, one of the last pieces he really finished composing. At that time, Gottlieb was already recording the first of a series of CDs of Wilhelm Grosz's piano music, which was released in November to great critical acclaim. Among other news outlets, the New York Times and Die Welt wrote great reviews about it. And I'm very happy that tonight we can welcome in the audience the granddaughter of Wilhelm Grosz, Diane Forman-Berg, and some members of her family. So, there she is. Gottlieb Wallisch has played Wilhelm Grosz's music so far in a number of cities, in Schwerin, where he lives, in Rome at the Austrian Cultural Forum, in London, recently in Oxford at the university, last week or 10 days ago at the Schoenberg Center in Vienna. And he just came from Boulder and Denver, Colorado, where he gave a masterclass and played another concert. And tomorrow he will play also Wilhelm Grosz, accompanied by others, Schönberg and I think some Mozart, in Washington. We, Elysium Between Two Continents, have known him and started working with him in 1998 when we toured with music from the ghetto and concentration camp Theresienstadt to Rostock, Vienna, and particularly important to Sarajevo, a city which was just coming out of a 4-year-long siege and whose citizens could identify with the destinies of the inmates of Theresienstadt on a profound level and were thirsting for culture. And that was a very memorable program, and that's when we first started working with Gottlieb. And now I hand the microphone over to him. He's going to do the heavy lifting and explain to you what he's going to play and introduce the different pieces. Thank you very much for being here. And I think he also has a few CDs of the Wilhelm Grosz with him that are later out in the Great Hall for sale. Thanks so much.
Very good evening. Hello. Thank you, Michael. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's an honor to present this program at the Leo Baeck Institute, and I would like to thank Leo Baeck Institute and Elysium Between Two Continents for making this evening, this night possible. I'm going to introduce a little bit the pieces and the composers that you're going to hear tonight. The whole program, this project started last year as a cooperation between my university, the Berlin University of Arts, and the University of Oxford. And our aim was to further research and rediscovery of exiled composers of Viennese or Berlin origin who went to the United Kingdom to exile. The most obvious link, I would say, between Vienna and Oxford is the composer Egon Wellesz. Egon Wellesz was born in 1885 into a very liberal Jewish family. They were quite well off. And until today, I would say he's one of the really forgotten Viennese modernist masters among Austrian composers, unfortunately. Young Egon Wellesz had piano lessons with Karl Frühling, who was a quite eminent composer, a student of Johannes Brahms himself. But his main teacher afterwards, when Egon Wellesz decided to study musicology, became Guido Adler, the godfather of modern musicology in Vienna, so to say. Already at the age of 14, Egon Wellesz, after a performance that he saw at the Vienna State Opera of Gustav Mahler conducting the Freischütz, Egon Wellesz knew that he wanted to become a musician. So this night must have impressed him so much, seeing Gustav Mahler, something wonderful, something I would dream of, having the possibility to experience Gustav Mahler in life, but yes. Some years later, in 1905, Egon Wellesz was acquainted with Arnold Schönberg through a fellow disciple, Karl Horwitz. And Wellesz became one of Schönberg's earliest pupils. He found himself in the same group or circle with Alban Berg and Anton von Webern. Nowadays, we quote always Schönberg, Berg, and Webern as the founders of the Second Viennese School. But at the time, in 1906, we know actually from a correspondence, a quote by Alban Berg, where Alban Berg refers to us as we four. So that means Egon Wellesz was included in this group. He was very much part and very important in this group. However, he just stayed for 1 year with Arnold Schönberg as his student. We don't know why he left him in 1907. He found his own way and developed his own musical style. Some more very interesting details about Egon Wellesz. He admired Schönberg profoundly and sincerely, and he always showed greatest respect throughout his whole life for Arnold Schönberg. And this became manifest in his 1920 monograph of Arnold Schönberg. That was the first ever written biography of Arnold Schönberg. It appeared already in 1920. Egon Wellesz also worked as an administrator for Schönberg's Society for Private Performances, the Verein für musikalische Privataufführungen. That was a society that Schönberg created in 1920 to present musical pieces, new works, to a selected group of friends and music lovers in Vienna. Wellesz co-founded in 1922 in Salzburg the International Society for Contemporary Music, together with composers like Anton von Webern, Wilhelm Grosz, Arthur Bliss, Ethel Smythe, or Rudolf Reti. Wellesz was also amongst the first to introduce the music of Claude Debussy in Vienna. I'm going to come back to this because it's an important fact for the music that you're going to hear soon. At the same time, showing this wide range of musical interest, Wellesz also became the leading expert of his time on Byzantine music. Wellesz was a very famous and successful composer in the 1920s and 30s, and he was very well connected in Europe. His works were performed by leading orchestras, and through these connections, he was able, in 1938, after a performance of a piece in Amsterdam, to escape to London, and later on to Oxford. Through a grant, he worked in Oxford on the Grove's Dictionary of Music, and he spent the rest of his life until his death in 1974 in Oxford. Very interesting also that he kept composing, and all of his 9 symphonies were written in Oxford, so in the second half of his life in exile. Some quick words about the pieces that you're going to hear. The pieces Opus 4 were written in 1909, 1910. I think Wellesz was what we would call a decent pianist. He was not an outstanding virtuoso, like Wilhelm Grosz. You're going to hear that later. But he was a decent pianist. He knew how to treat the piano. He knew how to write also efficiently for the piano. And his piano oeuvre is quite vast, and most of this output was written between 1909 and 1927. Tonight's pieces called Der Abend, the evening, Opus 4, they shape, let's say, the image of a tone poem, a Tondichtung, and they're clearly rooted still in the late Romantic tradition. But we also hear some French Impressionism. We hear influences of Debussy, I would say. We could call this piece as an example of Wiener Impressionism, Viennese Impressionism. Maybe you're familiar with other pieces of that genre, Anton von Webern's early tone poem, orchestral piece Im Sommerwind, or also parts of Arnold Schönberg's Gurre-Lieder show this French influence. The pieces are clearly rooted in tonality, but Wellesz frequently uses the interval of the fourth instead of the third. This is something that Schönberg, his teacher in 1906, did in his chamber symphony, Opus 9. And the main theme of this chamber symphony is just a fanfare of rising fourth. I'm just going to play this for you, and then we'll compare it to a passage of Wellesz. So that appears in the third piece of Wellesz. Maybe you can later on get back to that. So first the Schönberg, 4 bars introduction. And now the fanfare. So this rising fanfare. Wellesz, we hear this. And so on. So, just about the 4 titles of the piece, I think they're self-explanatory. First movement, the pastoral. The second, Angelus, the angel. Probably a more religious background. Number 3, Dämmerstunde, translated at dusk. And the fourth, Wind über der Heide, wind on the heath. Wellesz premiered these pieces himself in 1910, played them in Budapest for the first time. And none other than Béla Bartók was present at this concert, and he was so taken with these pieces, so impressed, that he helped young Wellesz to find a publisher for them. Thank you. last year was 2024, and there were many jubilees. We were celebrating Arnold Schönberg also. His 150th birthday was celebrated all around the world. And after all of these last year's all-encompassing celebrations, I think you are all experts on Schönberg now, and you know everything about his biography, about his works, about 12-tone music. However, I would like today to play a piece which most of you probably haven't heard yet, and which shows a very interesting aspect of Schönberg, and especially of Schönberg's personal relations to other composers of his time. You're going to hear a Schönberg piece that was arranged by Italian composer Ferruccio Busoni. Busoni lived from 1866 until 1924, so that was another memorial year for Busoni also last year. And the original German title of this arrangement reads, he doesn't say Arrangement or arrangement, it says Konzertmäßige Interpretation von Ferruccio Busoni. So it's a concert-style interpretation by Ferruccio Busoni. Schönberg's three pieces, Opus 11, they date from 1909. Since the Opus 9, the Chamber Symphony, which I mentioned before, together with Wellesz, Schönberg's compositional style had developed significantly, tearing down the fundament of conventional major-minor tonal system. He went into this atonal phase. Opus 11, the three piano pieces, therefore, are already a very mature composition of this atonal phase, which started in 1906. As I said, the interest of this arrangement lies both in the personal relation between the two composers, and then, of course, also in Busoni's approach of how to arrange such a modern, at this time, contemporary piece of music. A quick glance at Busoni's standing within the musical world around 1909, 1910. Ferruccio Busoni was one really of the leading figures in classical music worldwide. He was famous as a pianist. He was famous as a composer, a conductor, an arranger, a promoter, a teacher, a writer, and a thinker. His 1907 treatise Entwurf einer neuen Ästhetik der Tonkunst became a really pioneering book of modern music. Arnold Schönberg, of course, had studied this book about modern music, about Busoni's ideas. And in 1909, even before completing the third of these drei Klavierstücke, Schönberg wrote a letter to Busoni, and he sought to interest Busoni in his new piano pieces. He wanted Busoni to perform them. I'm going to quote from a letter, from this very first letter. Schönberg writes, I have two piano pieces and have started several others. They are playable only by someone like you, whose sympathies lie on the side of all those who are seeking. Technically, they don't present any particular difficulty, but their performance demands belief and conviction. That is why I'm turning to you. The extensive correspondence that developed between the two men after Busoni had signaled his interest and Schönberg had sent him the pieces soon led to an exchange about piano technique and a new aesthetic direction in composition. We're very lucky that this exchange of letters has survived, and all these letters are very carefully and thoroughly being collected in the Busoni estate. You can find them online, and it's really worth finding them and reading them. It's wonderful to follow up this exchange of letters. And Busoni, on one hand, had great sympathy for Schönberg's music, for his new style, but as a pianist, he criticized him. Busoni complained to Schönberg that his ascetic piano style was only different, but not richer. And furthermore, it was a pointless renunciation of what had already been achieved in piano technique and piano playing at the end of the 19th century so far. In a word, Busoni thought that his form of expression on the piano remained unsatisfactory. That's from the letter of 2nd August 1909, a reply from Busoni to Schönberg. Therefore, Busoni took it upon himself to rework Schönberg's piece, the second piece of these three. Schönberg, again, he was flattered by the interest and the respect that Busoni paid him. At the same time, he was offended that Busoni criticized his way of writing the piano, for the piano. And he writes back to Busoni and explains, "My piano writing is not the result of any lack of ability, but the expression of a firm will, of specific inclinations, of clearly graspable feelings. What it does not do is not what it cannot, but what it does not want to do." At the same time, Busoni also tried to help Schönberg by finding a publisher similar to what I just told about Bartók and Wellesz. Busoni offered his own publisher, Breitkopf and Härtel, his own arrangement of the Schönberg piece that you're going to hear, and the 3 original works by Schönberg. This publication did not happen with Breitkopf, but 1 year later in Vienna with Universal Edition. That became the new publisher for Arnold Schönberg. And just a quick word, what Busoni actually does with the Schönberg music. He tries to reorchestrate the piece in a way. It's important to know that Busoni had already arranged pieces by Mozart, Liszt, Brahms, Schubert. And in 1909, he sits down to work on a piece of a contemporary composer, of a composer from the next generation. So this really shows the high esteem he held for the music. On the other hand, it also shows how he looked from a late romantic point of view on this music. So Busoni stretches out several motives of Schönberg. He doubles or triples them. He adds some extra bars here and there. He adds extra octaves. He extends the music. He tries to orchestrate, as I said, the piece and tries to give it a richer palette of colors and sonorities. This eases the music in a way and makes it a little more comfortable to play and also for the listener to grasp than the somewhat austere original. Curiously, also, the piece in the Busoni version becomes 3 minutes longer than the original Schönberg. So you're going to hear 9 minutes of music for the price of 6. As I said, both versions in 1910 were published, and the Opus 11 became a big success, both for Schönberg and also for Universal Edition, because they sold, until 1920, almost 6,000 copies. Many pianists started playing the pieces. Prokofiev played them in concert, Béla Bartók played them in concert. But Busoni, we know today, actually never performed it. And that was the original aim of Schönberg, to have his pieces performed. So now we have a Busoni arrangement, and Ferruccio Busoni, to end the little story of the relationship between these 2 personalities. Busoni died in 1924 in Berlin, and 1 year later, Leo Kestenberg in Berlin named Arnold Schönberg his successor. So he made Arnold Schönberg professor of composition at the Berlin Music Academy, which is today the university where I have the privilege also to teach piano. This position Arnold Schönberg held from 1925 until 1933. So Schönberg in Busonis konzertmäßiger Interpretation. Welcome back. Welcome to the last piece of this concert. It was written by Wilhelm Grosz, composer who was born in 1894 in Vienna. I came across this really unjustly forgotten composer during preparations for another project. I did a lot of research for a project that we called 20th Century Foxtrots. It's an ongoing CD series that deals with composers of so-called E-Musik, we call them serious classical music, who were influenced by the jazz wave after the First World War that came over to Europe and picked up all these syncopated rhythms and started writing foxtrots, started including tangos and Boston waltzes and Charlestons into their either symphonic pieces or even operas. Think of Ernst Krenek, Johnny spielt auf. Think of Kurt Weill later on, of course. But this phenomenon really started as early as 1918, 1919. And Wilhelm Grosz was one of the prominent figures in Vienna, very young, successful composers at the time, who implemented these jazz elements in his music. Grosz was an extremely talented composer. He came to great success at young age. His symphonic pieces, he started in the, I would say, post-Malarian, Gustav Mahler, post-Gustav Mahlerian style, so hyper late romantic, I would call it maybe. He had great success. His pieces were played by the Vienna Philharmonic under Felix Weingarten in 1915, in 1917. He also collaborated with writer Franz Werfel, and he wrote stage music for several of his plays, very successfully. Grosz came from a wealthy Jewish family. His parents had a jeweler. Had a jewelry store in Vienna, right in the center at the Graben, which is around the corner of the famous, beautiful St. Stephen's Cathedral. And Grosz received his musical training in Vienna from Franz Schreker, who was a very important, eminent musical figure, important as a composer of operas himself, but also had a range of really wonderful students like Grosz himself and Ernst Krenek, Karol Rathaus, Alois Haber, and many more, Berthold Goldschmidt and many more. But Schreker was not his only teacher. He also studied with Robert Fuchs, piano and composition, and he studied also musicology like Egon Wellesz with Guido Adler. As I said, Grosz was probably one of the most versatile talents at this time. His compositional oeuvre encompasses almost all genres. He wrote symphonic pieces, operas, operettas, chamber music, piano music, lieder, cabaret music, stage music, film and radio music, radio operettas. And later on in his life, in the 1930s in exile, he started writing pop songs. Some of you might know some of the titles, Isle of Capri, for instance, or Red Sails in the Sunset, Harbor Lights, and many other hits. In the 1920s, in the late 1920s, he was called to go to Berlin, where a new record company was built up. It was called Ultraphon and later became the famous recording company Telefunken. And Grosz became the first recording producer of this company. So he was there to build up a recording catalog. He arranged pieces, he shortened pieces because the records at the time contained only several minutes of music. So he arranged pieces like Strauss waltzes, Mozart's Little Night Music, and other famous pieces. He conducted them, recorded them himself with the Berlin Philharmonic, and they became part of this recording catalog of Ultraphon. You can still find on Shellac, sometimes on flea markets, you find these recordings. In 1933, he had to leave Berlin very quickly, unfortunately. He went back to Vienna. In 1934, he decided to emigrate. He took his family and went to London. He spent 4 years in London. He changed his compositional style, as I said, and started writing hit songs. In 1938, because of the growing fear of war in England, he wanted to make plans to follow the call of his school friend Erich Wolfgang Korngold and make the next step over to the United States. That's what he did also with his wife. He came to New York in 1938 and was planning to move further to the West Coast, but alas, this never happened. His untimely death in 1939 at the age of 45 in New York. The story goes that he had a heart attack during a private performance when he accompanied singers in Richard Strauss' Rosenkavalier. So Grosz died on 10th December 1939 in New York City, age 45. The piece that you're going to hear requires a lot, physically from me, mentally from you, and you're going to hear a piece that lasts half an hour. The title, Symphonic Variations, already describes very well the enormous range of the piece and the big structure, the big picture in this piece. He wrote this piece in 1919, 1920. The piece is written in C-sharp minor, which makes allusion to another piece of similar title by Robert Schumann from several decades before, the Symphonic Etudes. Maybe some of you are familiar with this wonderful masterpiece by Schumann. So there are Symphonic Etudes by Robert Schumann in the same key. But there's also another work there by César Franck, French-Belgian composer, that is called Symphonic Variations for Piano and Orchestra. That's a piece from 1885. So Wilhelm Grosz was an outstanding pianist. We have recordings of his playing solo and also on piano duet. We know what he was capable of at the piano. And this piece is really highly inspired, and like a symphony, it shows a very large four-movement structure. The first movement presents the theme. The theme already goes over one page. It's very majestic. Then follow 6 variations, and he switches from C-sharp minor to D minor. Further on, introduces a slow section in F minor, which is a very remote key to C-sharp minor. In this slow movement, we hear some influences of Korngold, Gustav Mahler, because later on you will also hear a funeral march in C minor, which is really reminiscent of one of Gustav Mahler's symphonies. Further on, he moves to F sharp minor, another very curious key in this relation, and presents a scherzo, so to speak, the third movement of the symphony. And finally, we get to finale, variation 15, is the finale, back to C-sharp minor. In this finale, he does not really follow the classical order of one variation following the other, but the whole structure becomes quite unstable, I would say, and there are very sudden changes in character. You will hear some jazzy influences, some foxtrot rhythms, you will hear a waltz that appears even twice, and in the end, there is this bombastic coda where he juxtaposes the main theme with the main counterpoint theme. I personally feel a lot of disruptive forces in this finale, and maybe this mirrors the instability of the time after World War I. This is, of course, a very personal interpretation. Wilhelm Grosz premiered this piece in 1921 played himself at the Donaueschingen Festival. It's a festival in Germany dedicated to contemporary music, which actually exists until this day. And it is really the oldest festival for contemporary music today in the world, and it's still there. So I wish you and myself a lot of endurance, a lot of pleasure with this big piece. Thank you very much. you.